Okay, officially recording. So opened up Rhino and you get prompted with a startup template. It basically asks you what scale you want to draw in, or what units you want to draw in, and then what size object are you drawing. And so if you select on these guys, it'll give you a description of what the template should be used for. So large objects, buildings, and things larger than a truck. We'll probably be working primarily in the small objects, inches, and this is more precision, basically. So if you look at the tolerances here between these two, there's just a little higher tolerance here, right, in the smaller objects. So like if you were doing machine shopping and you had to go up, down to the 100th of an inch, as a tolerance, you'll probably want to use the small object, inches or feet, to start drawing your, to start the template. So I'm going to go ahead and utilize the small objects in inches, and I'd leave the ask every time kind of symbol up, just because it's nice to be able to select a template right away without having to go into the properties and manipulate that stuff every time you go in to change your tolerances. But we will show you today how to do that. I'm going to go ahead and open it. And so I'll get a little closer so I can read my little cheat sheet here. Yeah. Where's the trash can at? Okay. Sorry. No. We got to go the whole time. All right. So, this is the screen that pretty much pops up. You will have a little bit different menus here. There'll be tabs for your layers and properties. You're going to want to keep those open. They're pretty useful. You can think of layers similar to AutoCAD. If I pull this thing out, you've got the name of your layers, the visibility of your layers, whether you can lock them, change their color of the line that represents in your view field. This is where you set up your materials, and then line weights. And so you can change your line weights depending on what you're doing. We're pretty much be with the continuous line, but if you were, doing a full-scale model of a building in here and you needed to show property lines and center lines and all sorts of, overhead lines, you would start to, add some layers that give you those capabilities. But we're not really going to get into that. We're primarily modeling furniture in Rhino for this class. And then this check button, if I double click on any other layer, that check button represents what layer is active, that you're actually drawing on. And if I right click it, if I have an object selected, obviously I don't have one right now drawn. If I have an object selected, I'm able to change the object layer. So for instance, as you start to build a piece of furniture and you've got all these different separate parts or components that make up the piece, it might be useful at some point to start thinking about, maybe one layer has your line work on it, one layer has, a solid surfaces on it, one layer has meshes on it, one layer has, surfaces on it. And so I'm starting to get into talking about the curved surfaces, solids, and meshes, which is in the toolbar up here. But you'll want to start thinking about what objects you place on what layers, and then when you go to apply materials, you're going to also want to think about that as well. And so as you make a more complex model, you're going to want to start using more layers. And so you can create new layers by right-clicking as well. And so maybe you have two pieces of your furniture piece having the same material, but when you apply the material to it, one of them, the material is not applying kind of correctly to one piece of that furniture. And so then you might think about, okay, I need to put them on two separate layers, and now I need to create an additional material and maybe rotate the texture so that it aligns with the material, or with the component a little better. And so layers are pretty important to start to understand how you can manipulate them and use them to your advantage. So the layer tab is important, and it sits up here. The menu bar, the toolbars, I like throw my mouse and I'm like on this side. I don't expect it. I'm like, where'd my mouse go? At any rate, our file menu bar is pretty straightforward. The file, create a new file, open up a new file, save a file, importing and exporting. We'll talk about this stuff, but this is kind of, just getting to know the user interface a bit here. The edit and view, the views obviously affect these viewports. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the software right here. The curve, surface, solid, and mesh tabs. Curves are lines, so they could be, a straight line, a polyline, a rectangle, a polygon, a free form, like a circle, an arc. But curves are lines, and they're similar to, they're vector lines, right? They pretty much can go on forever. We'll get into how to utilize this a little bit later, but as you move to surfaces, solids, and meshes, it gets more complex. And so the curved menu is kind of the simplest form of Rhino, creating lines. And then as you move to surfaces, you can start to create planes from those lines, or sweep things off of those lines or curves. And then you can then take it one step further and create a solid from, the surfaces, or and then take those solids and put a mesh over them, which is basically dividing that surface up into a bunch of different segments, and then being able to manipulate each little segment. So the basic is the curves, and then as you move through those, it gets more complex as far as what you can do with it, and how it works. And so we'll explore all of that, obviously, as we walk through the next next week and a half for the software. But just kind of give you a basic general concept and idea of what those are. Dimensions, this is where you can start to dimension objects. So if you need to know what size they are, or need to change the size of them, you would utilize the transform menu. And so, you have similar tools: move, copy, rotate, scale. You can scale in 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, and 3 dimensions. We'll talk about the differences of what those are a little later on, but just kind of figuring out where this stuff is and orienting yourself to these is fairly important. in your workflow of getting used to using Rhino as a modeling tool. All of these functions are also on these sidebars. So they don't necessarily are labeled, but if you hold down your left mouse button when you hover over them, they'll start to tell you what these quick keys are. And you'll notice that when I hover over them, there's a left mouse option and a right mouse option. So these quick keys allow you to do two things with one tool. So it's like, you know, you click on the left mouse tool and now you're doing one thing. If you click on the right mouse tool, you're doing something else. So you want to be careful of that. The command line as well is this right here. I don't know if yours is up here or down here, but all of these things are movable. So you may like your command line down here, or you might like it up here. It's really up to you. All of these tabs are also movable. So by hovering over the little patch symbol there, you know, you can start to move these guys around the screen to your liking. This is kind of the default setting here. If I can get it to snap in there. Yeah. And of course I'm on a tool right now. I'm going to escape out of that. And then this command line, you know, does other functions. The file, you know, part of the file menu where you have you can create a new document, save one, or open one, save one, print. As you go down the line, you know, we'll get into rotate. So we're now into the transform tab. You know, the pan, rotate, zoom, as we go down the line. And so hiding objects, showing objects, similar to the layer function here of turning a layer on and off, but it's specific to a particular object that you have selected. So it's not just necessarily a layer, it's the actual object. Creating lights. If you hold this down, you've got different types of lights that you can create. This is a little render button. You start to render out your 3D views. And settings brings up your options. And so if you didn't know that that was your settings or options for Rhino, you could always find it under File, Properties. Did I do that right? Hold on. Is that the different settings? It's the same settings, right? Am I crazy? Document properties versus setting properties. Okay. I believe they're the same thing. So, our document properties, we definitely want to be looking at our document properties now. So go to File, Properties to start looking at this. There seems to be a little difference between the two. I'll have to look into that. So this is kind of also another kind of meat and potatoes part of the software where you start to define a lot of things. So the rendering settings are set up here. We won't get into too much detail today about this, but just knowing where they're located is important. The drawing units are here under the document properties. It allows you to modify your units, your tolerances, and then also your distance displays. So some of you may be comfortable looking at fractions in inches, and you can do a display precision, up to 1/128th of an inch. That's probably a little overkill. 1/16 or an eighth is probably what we need. But if you utilize decimals, obviously you can go to, 100th of an inch if you want, or 1,000th of an inch in your distance displays. So I guess I'll leave it at feet and inches, and 1/16 of an inch, more or less. So page units and units, I still need to look into this, what the difference of those two are. Do you happen to know, by any chance? So one's like paper space versus drawing space. I didn't even know there was a paper space existed.
Well, I know the 1 unit, the top units is for the actual model space.
Okay, fair enough.
In our version, it shows like there's model and then layout units.
Yeah, so in version 5, I think they put in a similar to AutoCAD, where you have model space and layout space. I would imagine that's what that is. So that might be referring to layout space. I feel like I need to get that, but I really don't want to bite the bullet. At any rate, I don't know everything about Rhino. I don't use it that much, but I know enough about it to hopefully get you guys started on getting interested in it and using the software. So I admit right up, I don't know everything about Rhino. So dimensions. We'll talk about grids a little bit. So this grid here is the grid that we're talking about in all 4 viewports. Whoop. Pan key is just hitting the right mouse button, by the way, in any space, and then it's rotation in perspective view. And if you want to pan in perspective view, you hold the shift key down when you press the right mouse button. Getting sidetracked. Going back to our properties. Grids. So this grid is a 50-inch grid, and it's basically defining this 50 inches. So overall, it's 100 inches by 100 inches. And then the grid lines themselves are spaced every 0.25 of an inch. It's a little extreme, but and your on snap, your snapping to spaces when your grid snap is on, is set to 0.25 of an inch. So that kind of correlates with the grid of the lines as well. So, depending on what you're making, you may want to manipulate those two functions to suit your needs. Maybe you are using this to build a building, and you need a structural bay that's every 30 feet, and so maybe you want to change your grid to represent that, so that you don't get off track, if you know what I mean. So we're going to leave it the way it is, but just know that you can manipulate that grid system and the snapping of the grid system here under grids in the document properties. line types, if you want to create additional line types that didn't come up in that dialog box when we clicked on the layers, you can do that here. Never created another line type, but you have the option to do it, and you know where to go to do it. The other big one here is modeling aids. The nudge factor, the nudge. Oh, okay, never mind. Can't think of the TV show that somebody says that, like, really strangely. At any rate, yours will probably be defaulted to Alt plus arrow keys. You're going to probably want to change that to just arrow keys. You'll, surprisingly enough, use nudge more than you think in this software. You know, you'll grab a NURB that is, controls a line, and you'll want the line to shift slightly, and you use the arrow key to do it. It's not super precise. But this is where you can make it precise. So this, it seems not super precise, but in reality, the nudge key alone moves the object 0.2 of an inch. If you want a less of a nudge, you can hit the control key plus the arrow to do 0.05 of an inch, or a larger nudge, does a shift plus the nudge key is 2 inches. And again, if you want to, set that up to a specific dimension, this is where you do that. I think it's probably okay to leave the defaults the way they are, especially for what we're doing. We're not going to be looking at machining precision things up to, a tolerance of like 1/1000th of an inch. So it's not that drastic to change those at this time. But again, if you were doing something with very high precision, and you needed to know how much that nudge is, you can go and figure that out here and change it. I'm allowed to take a breath, right? And like collect my thoughts. No, I'm not. Fine. Smart track. I forget if we really talked about this much, but do many of you guys use AutoCAD? Like 2000, the versions? Little bit. Do you know what the smart track is from AutoCAD? No? Never used it? Okay. I was hoping you'd be able to explain it to everybody.
Yeah, no, you don't want me explaining AutoCAD.
But essentially, Clay actually can explain this. He uses that function all the time in AutoCAD, whether he realizes it or not.
I'm guessing I don't realize it.
More or less, it allows you to auto track. So if you want to draw a perpendicular point or a line based off of another point, that's what smart track is.
So if you hover over below the end and you're like a ways below it, it'll like automatically show you the connection. So where you're at, it's not too.
Yeah. It's
Ortho is like only horizontal and vertical.
right. Yeah, and this that's sort of the idea, but it's more or less So if you have a straight line this way and and it stops at a certain point and you want to match that point 10 feet over and start a new line, that smart track tracks that orthogonal line and allows you to start at a point directly in the same space, just 10 feet over, so that it's not like up or down or left or right. Does that make sense? I don't use it a lot, so I kind of don't fully understand it myself, but in the new versions of AutoCAD, sometimes I find that that useful when I do have to use AutoCAD. I know Clay uses it all the time because I've seen him use it all the time. At any rate, this is where you can enable that. However, you can also do it. I'm going to click OK and close this out down here. And so down on the bottom, I think you have some tabs down here as well that that say basically top, front, right, and perspective. I'm assuming that those are tabs that open up. If you double click on the viewport, it opens up a larger screen of it. I'm assuming, but I don't know for sure. Yeah? It does? All right. I love to hear some confirmation from the crowd. It makes me feel better about what I'm doing up here. So along with that, if you don't see these on-snap options here, it's probably because O-snap is not selected. So down at the bottom, there's snap, ortho, planar, O-snap, and history. So if you select the O-snap, it brings up snapping points similar to AutoCAD, where except that AutoCAD, you kind of hold it down and you're allowed to select like 4 or 5 of them. It just has a little display bar down here that says, you know, oh, I want my end on my O-snap, on-snap to the end or near, point, middle, center, intersection, perpendicular, tangent. Don't know that one, quad, and a not object snap. Doesn't that sound weird? I want a not object snap. Sorry, I guess that. At any rate, so you can leave that up, and at some points you may want to disable it for some reason, and so that, similar to disabling the on-snap in AutoCAD, all right, it turns disable, turns it on and off. S-track is the smart track, so you can disable it or turn it on here as well. So I knew I was getting back to that S-track thing. And then ortho, again, if you turn that on, you know, you're basically only allowed to draw in straight lines, horizontally and vertically. So that's good to have on sometimes, and sometimes it's not so good to have on. And the snap, I believe, is the grid snap. So I'm looking to you. The snap itself turns on whether you're snapping to the grid or not. So if we were to select a line here and scroll in pretty far, you can see how it starts to snap to that grid line. I believe if I turn that off, it won't snap to the grid line anymore. So we've gone through the toolbars briefly, the command line. Did we actually talk about the command line at all? Not really. The command line is similar to the command line in AutoCAD. So if I were to escape here and just start typing in line, it'll bring up every command it knows that starts with those letters. And so you can start to, instead of using the menus or the quick select keys here, you can start to type things in directly into the command line. And once you select it, the command line prompts you to what do you do next, right? And so you have all these different options that you can select, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. But basically, I'm going to turn my snap back on just to snap to some random point here. So I selected, now it says, okay, select the end of the line. And so it prompts you to kind of do what you need to do next to complete the function, right? And we're not going to get too much into drawing today, but just note that you want to be careful about what viewport you're working in and how you're drawing. The other kind of cool thing about Rhino is that once you start drawing in one viewport, you can move to another viewport and you're automatically drawing in that viewport. And you can see in my perspective view and my right side that my line is no longer straight, right? And so you want to be careful about that, about how you're drawing in the software. So again, now I switch to my right side of this. I like to think of it as kind of, it's a cube, right? And the top view is looking at the top of the view. The right side is looking at the right side of the cube. The front is looking at the front of the cube. And really all that's saying, right, is that we're working on a X, Y, and Z planes. We have 3 different planes that we can draw on. But you can start to draw on 2 of them. So you want to be careful about what you're doing when you start to draw lines. So, and it kind of just proves the point a little bit further is when I've got a straight line in the top view, the front view, I'm actually looking at a point, right? Because this is a vector line. So it's just a point in space because we can't see what's going on. But then in the right view, we're looking at this object, this line, looking this way. And so that's why we're starting to see, the line again, right? So as you're drawing, just be aware of that and be careful about which plane you're working in, because you can easily start drawing lines and they're all over the place very quickly. So you want to be careful about that. The other kind of nice thing with the line tool is we can start to type in a dimension here before we finish our command to specify an exact distance. And so if I typed in 20 and pressed enter, it's 20 inches, right? And from point to point, that's the 20 inches. And so you can draw this in any direction you want, but if you want to start using ortho without having to select it, you can hit the shift key and it starts to snap to vertical and horizontal. So that helps when you start to draw things, so you're not getting a line that isn't quite straight. And then to finish it, you keep holding the shift key if you want it straight, and then click to end the command. And that's very, very basic start to Rhino. Get familiar with the user interfaces. Curves, let's see. We talked about model units, tolerances, distances. Didn't talk about that yet. So we'll save that for Thursday. Maybe we'll just kind of briefly review some of those properties on Thursday as well. But over the next couple of days, maybe open it up and play around with it so you get a little familiarized with the software and the menu bars. I think starting out, it's good to just utilize the menu bars and figure out what you're doing. It's kind of intuitive that way. Oh, I'm going to draw a line. I need to go to the curve. What kind of curve do I want to use? It's all visual. It's all there. You can select on it, and then the command line prompts you to do the next thing. And so when you're first starting out, I think it's probably pretty important to utilize these, but as you get more comfortable with them, you can start typing in the commands or using the quick key toolbars here on the side. So we'll end like 3 minutes early, but that's it.
Not sign it.
I guess before we end, does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, yeah, make sure you sign in for today, and we'll see you on Thursday. And I'll go ahead and post this video at some point tonight so you can review